Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be showing you how to do a front inner tube replacement on a Xiaomi scooter. This procedure is only going to apply to the front inner tube. I'll be doing a separate video for the rear as there's quite a lot of in-depth things I want to be talking about as someone who's been doing these for quite a while now. We're going to start straight off with looking at the tools, so let's get straight into it. Alright, so I've started you on this sort of overview shot of everything first of all, just so I can show you all the tools that I'm going to need. I'll go through bit by bit showing you what's recommended and what is necessary to do this inner tube replacement. So first of all, we're going to need one of these valve core extenders. Not every single pump is going to have a valve core extender built into it, so depending on what pump you have, this might not be necessary, although I would definitely class it as a needed tool that you will need to do this procedure, as putting the inner tube in, sometimes the valve can actually recess right back in to the actual tyre. So I'll show you what that is further on down the procedure, but you're definitely going to need one of these. It's very handy to have some of these Pics to hand. I've just got some cheap Rolson ones. This is a double bent pick here. You're definitely going to be needing a flex ratchet spanner. All we need is this end here, the open end, so you don't need the ratcheting mechanism. This is just the spanner that I have. We're also going to be needing a T20 bit and a ratchet. I've just got this Halford's Advanced one again. This one's going to do just fine, but any T20 bit is going to be fine. We're going to need a 2.5mm Allen key to take the screws off of the caps that go over the nuts to take the wheel off. These Part Tool tyre levers, they're called the TL5s, I believe. These are a necessary tool you are going to need to do this procedure. I would not recommend using tyre spoons. These are much better. You can get really good leverage. They're very strong, bent at the end, so you can get into the tyre and remove it easily. These are definitely a needed tool. They're only about £15–20, worth every penny if you're going to be doing this. Make it really easy. I can't speak highly enough of these tools. Definitely get yourself a set of these. You're going to need the two, not just the one. They only come in sets of two anyway. And then you're also, I would recommend having some maul grips. It can make it a lot easier. I usually only use one maul grip. Doesn't really matter if it's the sort of straight end or the bent end. I've got two sets here just in case. I'll show you a couple of different ways how to get this tyre on, but you're only going to need the one. And then I've also got a set of pliers as well. These can be needed sometimes to pull the valve through, although we do need to go careful using these because you can bend the valve. If you are going to be doing the cleaning of the area once the tyre's off, some microfiber cloths are advisory but not necessary, and you're definitely going to need one of these magnetic trays or some sort of bowl to put all the screws in just so they don't get lost. I use a magnetic tray, really handy. And then some sort of lubricant. I use disc brake cleaner because this dries really quickly. Very handy and easy to use. You can also use muck off or some dish soap. Soapy water also works, but that doesn't dry and it is going to get your hands wet as well. And then a hammer of any sort. This is the only one I've got, quite big, but makes it very easy. Ideally you want a mallet. I've got a metal hammer, so I'm just going to show you. We're going to need to go careful using this as well, that we don't damage the end of the axle when tapping it out. And then I would also recommend getting a set of gloves as well. I've got this set over here. They're just a standard set of work gloves. They're very handy just to make sure that you don't get caught on anything with your hands and don't hurt yourself. Really good set, these. I've also got muck off set. Doesn't really matter. So those are all of the tools we're going to need to do this procedure. I'm going to switch the camera angle now so that you're looking at the front wheel, and we'll get straight into this. I'm doing the first bit on a desk and then I'll do the second part on the floor, although you can do everything on the floor. Other than that, this is everything. You'll also need the new tube and tyre. I would always recommend changing the tyre when you're changing a tube if it's been a while, because the inside of these tyres, due to the heat of the motor, can actually wear away much faster than the rear ones. So you are obviously going to need your tyre and tube. I'm not going to be putting a new tyre and tube on. I'm just going to be reusing the one I've already got on here because I've just put these on brand new. So let's get straight into taking the wheel off. Okay, so let's get started removing this wheel. So first of all, what we need to do is take these covers off. So they're the little stickers. So the tool we're going to need for this is our double bent pick, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to take these covers off. And now what we're going to want to do is get our 2.5mm Allen key, and then we're going to need to take the bolts off here to take this cover off. Same on the other side here on the drive side, but what we need to do is take all 4 bolts off. Make sure these are fully loosened off before you try and pull the cap off here. What I like to do is pop the screws back into the cover they came from, just so we don't get any of our screws mixed up, although it doesn't really matter if you do. Alright, so now we've got the cover on the other side off as well. What I'm going to do is just place all of the screws into the cover just so they don't get lost. And then what we need to do next is to take our bolts out of the scooter. So I'll change the camera angle now just to get you a better view of this. Alright, so now we're going to need to get our 18mm spanner. At this point, I would recommend that you put your gloves on, and we're just going to remove these nuts here on the outside on both sides here, just being careful of the motor cable on the other side. These can be very tight, so it might be worth putting your scooter onto the floor if this is the first time you've done the procedure, although this isn't the first time I've done it, so I should be able to get these ones off without putting the scooter onto the floor. Now what we need to do is just to loosen these ones all the way off. The one on the cable side of the motor is just going to hang freely on the cable, and the one on this side we can take off and pop into our magnetic tray. There's going to be 2 washers on the inside of the fork. The one on the non-cable side we can take off and pop into our tray, and the other side we're going to just leave on the motor cable as we can't take that one off. Alright, so now that we've got the motor off, the easiest thing to do is going to be to put it onto the deck of the scooter, and then we're going to need to move the entire scooter onto the floor. Or if you're already on the floor, then you're not going to need to move anything. In some videos, I'd just like to quickly mention they do tell you to take these bolts off. Also, sometimes there's going to be 4 of these bolts. You should be able to get enough grip onto the nuts, so that's these right here, if I can show you. You should be able to get enough grip onto these where you don't need to take off these 2 screws here. If you find that your wrench is slipping, then take these screws off, and then you should be able to pull this plastic piece back to take off the nut there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our motor here onto the scooter deck, and we're going to move everything onto the floor. Alright, so now that we've moved to the floor, what we need to do, we need to undo this valve cap, and we'll pop it into our tray, and then let all of the air out of our valve here. I'm just going to use my T25 tool to do this. We're going to let all of the air out, make sure that there's no air left in there, and then from there we're going to take this motor assembly off. Now, we don't have to take the motor assembly off, but if you don't, then you will need to drill washer that does sit on the inside here to stop water from getting in, and then for the rattling of the valve. This washer stops you from pushing a new tube in. But what we'll do is we'll just proceed to take this motor apart. What you want to do before you start taking the motor apart is just making sure that your scooter is completely turned off. And you also need to make sure that when you're taking every bolt out, that the Allen key is perfectly square into the bolt, because otherwise you do risk rounding the bolts. And what I mean by that is basically ruining the bolt here and then not being able to get your Allen key in to loosen it off. We definitely don't want that, because otherwise you can't get your motor off. So we want to make sure that our Allen key is in perfectly square. And then what I do is I take these bolts off in a diamond pattern, just to make sure that the motor comes off evenly and now there's not too much stress put on one bolt. What I do is I'll take them all off just bit by bit, loosen them off first, and then from here we can just loosen them off the rest of the way. From here, what we need to do is tap this motor out. So what we can do from here is get our motor standing upwards, and then we want to tap the axle here just so the motor comes out. Just be careful not to tap the axle too hard, and we're waiting for this sound. That sound is what we're waiting for. From there, what we can do is bring the motor, just make sure that we don't get the cable. I'll bring it into the middle of the shop for you here. We want to bring the motor now not too far away from the housing, and with our knees we want to push this motor out. And then get our knees here just to hold this in. These magnets are very strong, so be careful. And then pull the motor out. Then just gently set the motor on the deck of the scooter, and then we've got this bit nice and free here so we can work on the tyre. Okay, so now that we've got this side off, what we want to do is take the washer out here. This is the washer I was talking about earlier that stops the valve from coming through. Some places will drill it, yeah, just to sort of get this from actually stopping the valve. I like to take it out, yeah, and do this way because it's a bit better, and you don't really want to be drilling next to an electrical motor ideally. From there, what we want to do is stick two of these tyre levers in here just to pop this bead off, and then work our way around the bead here. Now what we want to do is to push this valve, maybe get that remaining air right, push this valve up if we can, through here. Sometimes it's not going to be as easy as that. If not, that's okay. Now what we can do is we can either pull the tube out. If your tube is damaged, what you can do is get a set of needle nose pliers and just rip it out. My tube is fine, so what I'm going to do is to use the valley of the rim, which is this recess here, to get some slack into my tyre so I can just pull it off. I'm going to do this opposite to the valve so that I can pull my valve off once I'm done. Alright, there we are. And then we can just pull the valve through. And we've got it off. Alright, so now that we've got the tube out of the tyre, what we're going to do, we're going to get our brand new tube here and unpack it. Alright, and then we'll just take the valve off. This is fully deflated, which is what we want. Now sometimes the tubes can be directional, like the original tube which came out of the Xiaomi scooter. These tubes that I've got here aren't. These just go into the one direction. If you've got a directional in a tube, just make sure that the valve is pointing into the direction of the valve hole. So as we can see, we've got the valve hole on that side, so the valve direction needs to be in through there. Alright, but we're going to be putting our brand new tube in, so what can help is we want to put a bit of air into this tube. I've got my extender on the pump. We can take this extender off. What we're going to do is just pump a bit of shape into the tube. We only need a few pumps. Make sure your pump's fully seated onto the tube. There we go. There we are. Got a bit of shape into the tube. You don't need a lot, just enough to pump it up, and we can see that this valve isn't directional. From here we need to make sure that the tyre is facing the correct direction, and then from there we can push the tube into the tyre. It can get a bit twisted. Just work the rubber around, making sure that it's fully seated. From here it can help to let a bit of air out of the tube. Alright, and then just to get this back on, what we'll do is we'll pop the valve through the hole here. It can be a bit fiddly to get this through. Just be very, very careful. Can be helpful to get your needle nose pliers just to pull it through a slight bit, and then from here we can pull the valve upwards and then just slip our tyre pump on. It also can be a little fiddly, but once we've got it on we can pop it on all of the way, and then there's that remaining air. This is going to stop the valve from going back through into the tyre. Just we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, because then we'd have to restart the whole procedure. And then from here we want to tuck our tyre into the valley of the rim and work it around, just slowly pushing it through. At this point, if it gets a bit difficult, get some of your disc brake cleaner and just spray it around, and that will just allow the tyre to just slip straight back on, and this disc brake cleaner will just dry off. Alright, so from here what we need to do is just work our tube into the rim. Basically what this is going to do is just make sure that we don't pinch our tube in any spot of the rim. This can be a bit difficult, yeah, but just make sure that it gets in there. Just work it all the way around. Okay, and then from here what we can do is what we'll do is we're going to pull this, yeah, just to get the slack on the other side, so we can pop this in here. This is where it can be handy to bring in your maul grips just to pinch the tyre here, although I'm not going to use them. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to get that slack, push it on and step on the tyre like so to stop the bead from coming off. From here what we can do, we can just lever the tyre on bit by bit. Alright, so from here what we need to do is just make sure that this tyre is pumping up properly. And we can see that that's pumping up fine. But sometimes this doesn't seat in properly. So what can be handy to seat this in, what we can do is we can just try and seat it in by hand. Yeah, the bead. As much as possible, and then we can get our disc brake cleaner or soapy water or lubricant and just spray it all around the rim just to make sure that it seats in properly. This stuff dries quickly, so we want to be really quick. This is why it can be handy to use soapy water in this case. And then what I'll do is I'll pump it up to 60 psi first time, just to seat the bead. And then once we think that's fully seated, we want to let a bit of air out. We want to take it down to 40, maximum 50. Because if we do it to 60 psi, then it's much too much to be inside of our tyre. So we do it to 40, 50. We always lose a bit of air. That's no problem. Once you've taken the first part off, we can take the rest of the valve off. Alright, there we are. So we've got that back on. So now it's just about reassembling the entire scooter. Alright, so first of all what we need to do, we need to pop this little washer back in under the valve. Alright, from there we're going to put the motor assembly back together. So what we need to do, we need to bring and just make sure the tyre's on the correct way before doing this. These are very, very strong magnets, so be really careful putting this back together, okay? So what we want to do is we want to bring it in. Oh, that's not going in straight. Shit. And then it can help to put the top of the tyre against the scooter deck, just so we can push this in the rest of the way, because we can see here that if we have it on the floor, the axle isn't going to push through. And once we have it pushed in far enough, we can just get our screws in. What we want to do is we want to put these screws in bit by bit. So what I'll do is I'll get the screw, we'll just pop it in bit by bit here. Basically the reason we do this is so the motor pulls in evenly and straight, because if it doesn't pull in evenly, well, it's just about making sure that the screws have got even load on them. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that these ones are just snug there, and then I'll get the next ones. And if we were to tighten one down all the way, there's a significant load on that one screw. And then the motor, instead of pulling in evenly, could be at a bit of a slant, which would stop this screw from pulling in, which isn't the best. So we want to just make sure that these are pulling in nice and evenly. So now we're going to pop this wheel back on. Alright, so what we'll do is we'll pop the dust cap on first, and then we're just going to stick the wheel back on. So what I'll do is I'll bring the scooter now into the centre of the shop. We're going to do this part on the floor because we need to get these bolts here nice and tight. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to orient this little washer so it's in the downward position. I don't want to make my cable twisted, so that should be fine like that. We're going to orient the washer so it's in the downward position, and we're going to get our other washer here from the other side we pulled off earlier and pop it back on here onto the tyre, making sure that it is the correct way round, so that it's they're both pointing downwards, yeah? So that both of your washers are pointing downwards. These washers go on the inside of the fork here, and then the tyre should just slot straight on. Then we can start hand tightening these nuts here. So I'm just going to hand tighten the nut on that side. Same on this side, we can bring our nut back in. Now the reason I said earlier not to tap this axle too hard is because if we were to damage the end of the axle, we might not be able to get this nut on anymore, yeah? So what we want to make sure is that this doesn't actually get damaged, so that this nut threads on nice and easily, and that it threads on nice and straight. Might take a few tries, but there we are. And then I'm just going to thread them on just so that they're snug once again. And then we're going to get our 18mm spanner here, and we're just going to tighten these on just so they're nice and tight. Now these bolts need to be really, really tight, so make sure that these are nice and tight. This is why it's handy to have it on the floor, because you can make sure that they're really, really tight. You don't want these loosening off while we're riding. And just tighten them on until they don't tighten on anymore. There we are, and then just make sure that the tyre doesn't move back and forth. Now it's just a case of putting the rest of this back together. And we're all done. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully that worked okay for you. Now you can see that there is some damage on the rim. That can happen when you're using metal tyre levers. I know it's not the best, but this is the best way that I find to get these tubes on and off as quickly and efficiently as possible without pinching your tube. You can also do it a few other ways without taking the motor assembly out. If you wanted me to do a video on how to do those, how to change the tube those ways, then just let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and like the video if you did enjoy it, and if you have any questions or comments down below. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day.